All right, welcome to another Zrok Office Hours. So today we're going to be taking a look at some of the new work in the upcoming 0.4.6 release, and the primary focus in this release is going to be on Caddy. So uh, Zrok includes a bunch of facilities that help with working with HTTP resources and sharing them and doing various things with them. So in this release, we've kind of made some improvements to some of those things by way of incorporating another open source project called Caddy. Let's take a look at the changelog real quick. So I'm on my 0.4 Caddy branch. So let's just take a look at the changelog. And it looks like in 0.4.6, there is a new backend mode Caddy. Caddy has these. One of the cool things about Caddy is Caddy's sort of a declarative Swiss Army knife HTTP server, does a lot of reverse proxy things. People use it for any manner of easily extensible web middleware, all kinds of stuff like that. So it has this notion of a Caddy file, and a Caddy file sort of declares the resources that are used and how your Caddy is configured. So Zrok embeds Caddy directly and now includes a backend mode Caddy, which and we'll take more of a detailed look at this when we get to it, but it lets you easily bind a Caddy file to a Zrok share. So it ends up making a pretty nice little tool that lets you define complicated Caddy files and then just bind it to a Zrok share, which is really useful for a lot of things. So we're probably going to take a look at playing with that a little bit and seeing kinds of things we can do with it. The backend mode web, which is useful for primitive file sharing. It's useful for hosting websites over Zrok, things like that. The backend mode web has been refactored to use Caddy now, which means when you're using it for file sharing or just raw file system trees without HTML in them, it gives you a much nicer interface for looking at those things and working with them. We'll take a look at that too. Go has been updated to 121, and Node is up to 18.8, which is, I believe, the LTS version. Minor SDK change so far, just added the front end endpoints to the SDK share because I think I talked about this in a previous Office Hours video. One of the goals was sort of to refactor all of the Zrok CLI components to use the Zrok SDK to drink our own champagne there. That's been done on this branch that I'm working on, which is basically going to become 0.4.6. So we'll take a quick look at that too. In fact, let's take a look at that first, just because it's probably the easiest thing to look at. So if we close all this stuff, if we look at something like share public. So share public previously had its own calls to use the Zrok API. It made its own client, some of those kinds of things. That's all been refactored now to use environment load root was always there. But now it's using share request and all the SDK calls instead of doing that manually. So now that SDK exists as of 0.4.3, I think, all of these Zrok CLI components, share private, reserve, all those things have been refactored to use the SDK equivalents, so that we're literally the Zrok CLI itself is exactly the same as any other SDK application. So they all will sit alongside and cooperate and all that kind of stuff. Like Reserve uses the SDK, so it uses a share request. Reserve's really basic. So if you're not familiar with Zrok Reserve, when you do a Zrok share, the shares are typically ephemeral, so that when you quit the share client, the share goes away. You can reserve a share and keep that share token around longer than a single execution. You do that with the Zrok reserve command. So really all that's doing is just requesting that a share gets created, and that's all it does, and it just gives you your share token. So that's a really simple SDK example. So it's just doing a share request and then calling create share on the SDK. Very similar to the paste bin example for the SDK. Like there's nothing. These SDK clients are very similar to any other Zrok SDK client. So that's that. Nothing really to show for the Go version and Node version. That's just mostly updating the GitHub Actions release stuff to use those newer versions. Let's take a look at backend mode web now. So as usual, I'm running my own local development environment for this. It's already enabled and set up and all that good stuff. So if we do a zrok share public backend mode web, and let's just share, I don't know, let's share the whole tree, right? So if we share this whole tree, right? So we then click on this in a web browser, and now we get our fancy new browser interface. So this will actually let you, you could traverse file trees and things before, but now this is just much nicer in that you can, it's just got a prettier user interface. We got our serve with Caddy powered by zrok. If you go into here, you can filter whole trees. Like you can just search for like public, and it'll give you all the public things. So it's got some nice, client side filtering and that sort of stuff. Also, if you're serving a statically generated website or something along those lines, that still works just fine and does exactly what you'd expect it to do. In fact, I bet the MIME types for things on are better in general. Like now this knows the MIME types are all much more rich, and all of the wonderful things that Caddy brings to the table are working in backend mode web. So it's pretty slick, pretty happy with it, and excited to roll it out to everybody. I think it's going to be a nice little upgrade. You get downloads still work, and JSON files get viewed in the browser, and all the things you'd expect to work kind of work fine. So yeah, so that's backend mode web. Let's go ahead and quit that. All right, and then let's dig into the Caddy stuff a little bit, 'cause that's really the only other thing on this changelog that's sort of a big deal that we should talk about. So let's take a look at that. So out of the box, let's take a look at a Caddy file. I've got in this directory, the Etsy tree is where we keep all of the example configuration and that kind of stuff. So we'll go into Etsy Caddy, and let's just take a look at this simple reverse proxy, right? And let's pull up the Caddy website also. I think it's Caddy server up. Let's see, nope, Caddy. All right, let's pull this up. Yeah, Caddy's really slick. So we'll be looking at what other things we can do with Caddy as we go forward. So it's written in Golang. It's kind of similar in some ways to things like Nginx, and it has a lot of extensibility where you can sort of write your own modules for it in Go, which is really cool. I don't think most Caddy users actually embed it in their project. I think zrok is a little strange that way, and that we're kind of embedding it directly into zrok, so we can just still continue to ship that single binary and get those benefits. So yeah, file server and proxy. It's got, out of the box, it's got a bunch of cool stuff. So our backend mode web is basically Caddy file server. You can set up reverse proxies. You can run server with Caddy file and working directory if present. There's a bunch of cool stuff. So Caddy file, human readable, easy to write. It's a way to, build complicated web things with a really nice user-friendly configuration structure. So we've got this example Caddy file that binds HTTP to this fancy little notation here, zrok bind address. So when you run zrok share backend mode Caddy, it will pre-process your Caddy file and look for these bind statements, and it will replace, or it doesn't look for the bind statement, it just looks for this token and drops the zrok bind address wherever you want to put it. And Caddy has there's a bridge built into zrok now that lets Caddy bind to the underlying ZD network and the zrok share, and then serve it over zrok. So let's just run this real quick. Let's take a look at it. So if we do, let's go back a couple directories. Let's just make sure I'm running the latest build. Right. I can never got it. All right. So now let's do go install. Let's just build this real quick. I like to refresh my Go build tree once in a while just to make sure I've got everything's nice and clean. It's never Golang's never let me down that way, but I just, for some reason, years of building software has just kind of made me feel like I want to delete my build tree once in a while and kind of refresh it. So zrok version, we're on this. All right. Already enabled, all that good stuff. So now if we do a zrok share backend, I want to look at something real quick too. I think before I release 0.4.6, I'm going to add an alias for backend mode. I was thinking about this last night. There really should be like a -B or something like there is for help. You don't have to, so you don't have to type backend mode every single time. I'm going to knock that out real quick today, I think, before I put 0.4.6 out. So anyways, distraction. Zrok share public backend mode Caddy, etc Caddy, and then it was simple reverse proxy Caddy file, right? So due to the way Caddy works for sharing the logging and stuff, we don't really capture it, and because you can write an open-ended Caddy file, we're not capturing the TUI requests and things. Make a long story short, when you do a backend mode Caddy, it's defaulting to using headless mode. So we're always going to be running in headless mode because Caddy does its own logging. In the TUI version, like for the backend mode web, we are capturing the logs. The log does show up there. We are capturing the requests so that if you remember, if we do a, let's just show you again real quick, right? So if we do a zrok share public backend mode web dot, and we open this up, see it did capture zrok logging. It will capture Caddy's logging also, but you can see we are capturing requests and things just like normal, even though this is being served by Caddy, embedded in zrok. So all those things are possible, but because when you do backend mode Caddy, you have the ability to sort of define Caddy's configuration, so it's a less controlled environment for us. So it's maybe down the line we'll figure out a way to sort of post-process whatever you run, and then add in our own logging capture and our own request capture and stuff. I don't want to deal with it for this first MVP of the Caddy integration. So for now, when you run a backend mode Caddy, it is defaulting to headless mode, right? Oops. Right. So that does give us a URL, a public URL. So that we do put that at the top. Oops. I don't know why I keep doing that. Let's just run this here, right? Grab this URL, and if we curl this, so this is that Caddy file. If you remember, I'll pull it up again real quick. If you look at it, it is doing it's binding on the zrok bind address, right? And then it's running a reverse proxy. So this is exactly the same out of the box as like a backend mode proxy. Like it's just doing the same thing, but it's letting you define what you're proxying to in this Caddy file. So we're going to get into a more complicated example. We're going to figure out how to do multiple URLs and multiple endpoints and things to different addresses and stuff. So we'll figure that out. We'll try and come up with a more nuanced example. But for now, this is just pointing at this npm start in the UI. And I believe that's probably going to be unhappy. It doesn't like to be proxied like this. So if we do a curl and we pass it that URL, this share URL, right, through the public front end, yeah, it just complains about an invalid host header. So we probably could, in fact, I think there's a way. Let's look it up. Let's Caddy file reverse proxy host header rewrite. So let's just figure out how to rewrite this. Reverse proxy. Caddy has wonderful documentation for this stuff. I think it's like header in, or header up. Yeah, header up and header down. I think it's header up that we want. Let's look at that. Header up. Going upstream to the backend. So that's what we want. So header down must be coming from Caddy to the client. So let's find an example. I think what we want to do, I think we can just come in here and say header up. And let's say host, localhost 3000. I think that might do what we want. Let's try it. Didn't complain, so Caddy seems reasonably happy. Let's curl. It's a different URL now. I'm probably going to want to set up a reserved share so I don't have to keep making up a new URL, dealing with a new URL every time. Yeah, okay. So if you had a host header, so there's an example of a first complicated thing we can do with Caddy, or not complicated, but more nuanced than what you get out of the box with the proxy backend mode. We can rewrite the header. You can do any number of things inside Caddy here. So yeah, so it's definitely, I wonder if we can open up the browser now. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, yeah, well, that seems to work. Okay. So yeah, okay, that's cool. Um, let's try an experiment. Uh, yeah, so let's leave that there. So let's Google or search for Caddy reverse. Wow, reverse proxy, multiple endpoints. Let's see what we get with that. Proxy. Upstreams. List of which proxy. Okay. Got it. Upstream addresses. Kind of thinking I want to have uh, path prefixes. Like if I have one path in the URL, it goes to one backend. If it goes to a different path, it goes to a different backend. Yeah, headers we already know about. Yeah, this is kind of what we're looking for, I think. Let's try something like this. So let's just say node star, right? So if we do that and we restart this, it doesn't like that. I'll create share. Share limit check failed. Huh. Am I not cleaning up my shares? I wonder if that might be a little buggy bug. Let's take a look at that too. So if we go to localhost 3000, yeah, I've got a bunch of shares hanging around. So let's just delete some of these. Delete, yes. Delete, yes. Delete, yes. Okay, so there's all the shares gone. So this should be cleaning up our shares when we're done, but if it's not, then we need to figure that out. So let's try that again. It should be. So if we do this, okay, there's that, and we kill it, it does say deleted, right? Yeah, so that, okay, it is cleaning up resources. It's no different. The resource cleanup in the command line client is no different depending on the type of share. So if we do a share public, it has a switch that implements the different backend depending on the type of backend you've selected. But the code to do the cleanup is exactly the same. It doesn't really care what kind of resources. It's just a shutdown hook, right? So the shutdown hook is right here. So all it's doing is registering a signal handler and calling shutdown, right? Once you've exited the process, you terminated it. So that should be cleaning them up regardless, right? So that shouldn't be a problem. So let's try anyways, we go back to our Caddy file example here. So now we're saying we're prefixing the path, and let's see what that does. So if I go to, let's grab this URL. Right, and let's go /node. It doesn't seem to work. plugin? Huh. What we could probably do is say reverse proxy API star to let's send it to the controller for that. 1880, right? And that doesn't need a header rewrite, so we don't need to worry about that. Let's see what that does. So if we come over here and we say API, oh, I bet it's passing the path through unrewritten, and that is a 404 for the node dev server, but this won't be. Oh, well, helps if I do curl. Was I not doing? Oh, I wasn't doing curl before. Okay, wow, been a long week. I feel like I say that a lot in these calls, but it has been a long week, right? So this is the, yeah, this is the. So if I say API, what do I get? I get the same thing. So maybe it's not passing the path through. So if I say node, yeah. This is kind of a bad example because, actually, let's try this. Let's try API slash API v1 version. Nope. Getting a not found there. Oh, do I have a bad? Wow. This is going to be a really bad office hours video. So if you're watching this, I really appreciate you watching and bearing with me, but let's. Okay, so that does nothing. So if we say API, what do we get? Okay. Need to, yes, so that is the embedded front end in the controller. So I should be able to say API v1 version, right? Yes. Okay, so Caddy is not rewriting the URL. So when I say API v1 version, it's the same thing as saying localhost 1880 API v1 version, right? So you get that output. So now I've got a reverse proxy set up through Caddy where I can say pass that path through to that the controller's endpoint by way of this reverse proxy statement. And then I wonder if I can pass everything else through to the other one. Can I do that? Let's try it. All right, so grab a new URL. And then if we come over here and we say curl, and we say API v1 version, we still get the, because if we go to localhost 3000 API, we're gonna get a 404. No, we don't. Oh, it's proxying that too. Huh. Okay. Didn't know it did that. Fascinating. Huh. Okay, so let's try a different example. So let's just proxy everything through to, let's say everything except, let's say reverse proxy Google star, and then we'll just say https google.com, right? So let's just try that and see what that does. Reverse proxy, support scheme, host, and port components. Only support scheme, host. Does it not like the trailing slash, maybe? Okay, it didn't like trailing slash. So now if we do curl and we grab our zrok share URL. Nope. Grab our zrok share URL. We do curl to /Google. We get Google's homepage. And if we do anything else, we get Yeah, so we're getting npms. Okay, so if we kill that and we hit this, we're going to get nothing, right? So if we run npm start again, it's going to open a new window for me. Just fine. Let it open a new window, right? And if we run this again, now we get our development server, which is cool. Oh, I know why it. I think I know why we're getting extra shares. Maybe we can fix that in a second. We'll fix that in a second. I know why that's happening now. So that's cool. So if we hit Google, we get Google's website, and we hit this, we get our other backend. So there's an example of a multi-backend Xerox share using Caddy. It's pretty slick. Obviously, there's a lot of work to go in and learn possibilities and things we can do with Caddy embedded in Xerox. There's a lot of exploration to do there, but I mean, even that alone is pretty powerful and interesting. I know we can do load balancing and all kinds of crazy stuff. You could use reserve shares in Xerox and set up, production-like workloads, even production workloads using something like that. So that's pretty cool. In fact, let's just save this now. Let's do a save as. And let's just call this multiple backend. I think they call it upstream. It's called multiple upstream Caddy file, right? Bam. And then we'll just go ahead and okay. So let's do get add, get reset, Etsy Caddy simple reverse, right? Because we don't want to change that other example. The other example is really basic, simple reverse proxy, right? It's just okay. And we probably shouldn't use. That doesn't matter. It's just an example. I should probably put a little documentation in here too. But so let's just go ahead and commit that. And I like to tag my commits with the number of the issue. So Caddy backend. Yeah, and then also 388. So we'll say get CI. Multiple upstream example. Wow. Example number 330, number 388. Right? Yeah. Right. So there's that. Okay, before we wrap this office hours video up, let's go ahead and fix this bug. I'm pretty sure I know how to fix it. So before we fix the bug, let's go and clean up our abandoned share here. So what's happening is, if we go into share public, and I bet this is true for share private also. Yeah, it's true for both of these. It's probably true for share reserve too. So probably need to fix this in all three of them. What's happening is the share is being allocated here. So it's the first thing the program does when you say Xerox share public is it goes and loads your environment. It needs to make sure it's enabled so that it can actually do anything at all. Make sure you've got an identity, all that sort of stuff. Then it does the share request. So it allocates the share. And then what's happening is, because you can write a Caddy configuration file that is actually invalid, it's trying to use your configuration. And then what's happening is that's failing and it's just exiting. So what it needs to do here is do a command.shutdown root share, right? So it needs to make sure that we actually, because that command.shutdown is what deletes the share. So it's a leak. It's just leaking the share when the Caddy file parsing fails. So if we come back into here now and we say, see Caddy multiple, and let's just go back and put we know it doesn't like trailing slash here. So let's do that again. And if we open up the web browser, we can see we have no shares currently. So if we do a zrok share public backend mode caddy Etsy caddy multiple, right? It's going to complain. Oh, I didn't rebuild. Helps if I rebuild. So, right? Yes, delete my, yeah, great. Oh, my builds are taking so long today. Right. So yeah, there we go. So now we're throwing errors, but we're no longer leaking shares, right? Which is great. It does allocate the share, but it deletes it immediately, so it's not the end of the world. I'll have to maybe look into seeing if there's a way to parse that file in the case of Caddy, because like a better way to fix this so that we don't actually allocate shares. Like if you look at the proxy backend mode, it does try and do a parse URL to make sure that what you've given it is a valid URL. And if that fails, it will just exit at that point. When it's Caddy, we probably ought to be trying to parse the Caddy configuration to make sure it's valid at this point. So it might make sense to move that around. I'm not for 0.4.6. I'm not gonna fix that right now. I want to get it out the door, but I will put an issue in to make sure that that gets handled there instead of down. And it just creates the down in the actual this section here in the Caddy file backend. But let's, while we're thinking about it, let's come in here and fix all of these real quick. So Caddy, we need to make sure if this is bad, then we say command shutdown root share, right? And then share reserved is probably the same. So share reserved is different in that when you first thing it does is it tries to load your root, because it's, in this case, there's already an existing share. When you do a zrok reserve, you're passing it the share token. So what it needs to do is it actually needs to call the zrok API to get all of the share detail, because it's basically reloading the share from zrok itself. So it's what type is it, all that sort of stuff comes from here, and you can override the target using a command line flag. So you can update the target when you do a share reserve, but it's pulling most of the data from the service rather than locally, right? So it could still fail though. So we probably need to make sure here we say the same thing. We say command. Oh, there is no shutdown here. Okay, well then we need to write one real quick. Let's just borrow it from here. Let's borrow the whole function, right? And let's share reserved. No, we don't need to shut it down. No, we don't, because we're not actually deleting the share. It's reserved, so we don't need to do anything at all. So in the case of a reserve share, we're not leaking anything because you can release it using zrok release. So we don't need to do anything to reserved. So reserved is fine. So it's just public and private. So let's take a look at what we've done. Let's close all this stuff up. Close all tabs. Let's just pull up our diff tool. So Etsy Caddy. Let's put that back, right? We don't care about that. That should be, yep. And for share private, all we've done is add that command shutdown, which we tested in public. It's exactly the same path. They're very, very similar. And for public, same thing, command shutdown is really the only change we've made. Share reserve, we don't really want to make a change at all, so let's put that back. Okay, so that, right, those are the only things we've added. Fix for share leaks. Let's call it ephemeral share leaks. Ephemeral share leaks when using backend mode Caddy and the user provides an invalid Caddy file. And that really belongs to, I don't need this anymore, belongs to backend. Yeah, it's 330, Caddy mode backend, 330, right? All right. So anyways, that is a bunch of the interesting stuff coming out in 0.4.6. I expect that we'll probably continue to evolve and refine some of these facilities. We're definitely gonna, exploit as much of the Caddy goodness that we can. Um, so yeah, and the new backend mode web, like I love that already. Like that's just a fantastically better way to browse file trees and that sort of stuff. However, zrok drives is finally next on the roadmap, and I'm excited to start digging into that. That's when we're really going to get very slick and friction free with file sharing and uploads and downloads. And if I can get to it quickly, I might even try and do like a fuse mount where you can mount stuff locally. We'll see how far we can get. I mean, some of that stuff is definitely on the plan. We'll see how far we get, how quickly. But I expect that Xerox 4, let's call it 7 or 8, is going to have some really powerful sharing facilities that just make dealing with files magic wormhole style, like all of those kinds of things, really, really slick in Xerox. So if you've made it this far in this video, thank you so much for the time and attention. I'm going to try and keep putting these out at least every couple weeks and keep you guys in the loop of what's going on with Xerox. If there's anything that you would like to see in these videos, feel free to reach out to us on our discourse. I always get discourse and Discord mixed. Our discourse forum, there's a Xerox category in there. Take a look at that. You can always log an issue. If you've got an issue, go ahead and write into the GitHub. But yeah, I leave a comment on the video. That's always a good way to get a hold of us too. And always, it always means a lot if you can drop a star on the Xerox repo. Thank you so much, and I will catch you in the next video.